and good morning. Welcome. It is Skeetnet from the Isle of Man, and I've got Michael Josem. I'll get him on the screen. How do we do this? We've got Michael on. And
good morning, Jed, and at the outset here, let me say I have never been looking forward so much to Monday morning rolling around.
Well, it's all going to be back on track again. But, Michael, I've been fascinated with your output on social media. I go to michaeljosem.com and I'm faced with these charts as though they've emanated from a very skilled data or data expert. Tell me, what's going on? I can pull them up on screen. I'll pull one on screen, okay. Maybe you can talk us through it.
So I can't see what's on screen. See, which one have you pulled up?
Right, it's the blue chart, and it's vaccines used in the Isle of Man, 6178, and vaccines delivered to the Isle of Man, 17,000. Well, 17,500. And this was the other night, Burns night, I think, wasn't it? You posted this.
No, so this is a new one. This is exclusive, just released this morning, and so I tell you what, these charts have made me laugh because when I shared them, I got a bunch of questions. Oh, are you really a data expert, Michael Josem? What are your qualifications? And so, first of all, let us just be very clear. The sophistication of these charts is something that I looked into. This is the sort of thing that is currently being taught to 13 and 14-year-olds in grade 9 mathematics, where they begin to learn this sort of stuff. And so there is absolutely nothing sophisticated at all. The mathematics is literally you take the number of doses, you divide it by the number of people in the community, and then you what do you call it? You multiply it up so you get a number as a factor of per million or per 100 or whatever the scale is. And this chart that you have here in front of you has even less sophistication and even less complexity and even less mathematics than that. And so what we see here is a chart that shows how many vaccines have been delivered to the Isle of Man, which is 17,508, and also the number of vaccines that have actually been used and put into people, which is 6,178. And I guess I have a very simple message here, is that vaccines do not save people's lives, but rather vaccinations do. And so the only way that vaccines save people's lives is by being put into people. We can't leave them sitting in freezers. And for several weeks, well, in fact, actually for 2 months now almost, we've been hearing the government saying the key limit to getting vaccines is the amount that we've been supplied. We now know that is false. That is nonsense. That is bullshit. That is complete rubbish. And we now know that with 17,000 vaccines that have been delivered so far to the Isle of Man, with over 11,000 currently sitting in freezers in the Isle of Man, we now know that it's not an issue of supply, it's an issue of government policy that has caused these delays. But that said, and I just want to say one final point on that, Jed, and that is that there is beginning to be a change. And that of those 6,000 vaccines that have been delivered to people on the Isle of Man, almost half of them have come in the last 5 days. And so what we're seeing is that for the first 7 weeks, it was incredibly, arduously, painfully slow. And now we're beginning to see a bit of a sunlight. And so on one hand, I think that the government was deeply flawed in its decision to slow and delay and to wait, which has put lives at risk. But on the other hand, it looks like there's a bit of a change coming. And, I am not going to slag the government off continually. I'm not going to compliment the government off continually. I'm no cheerleader on either side. I'm just a numbers guy. And the numbers are poor, but they're beginning to get better.
Yes, because the paint's dried at the new vaccination suite at Ronaldsway. Those skirting boards, that's 2 coats of satin on those. Those weren't going to dry overnight, mate. That's why your vaccines have been set in a freezer rather than do what pragmatic jurisdictions have done in terms of stick up a few screens from Office World and get the nurses in there and getting on with the jab things. No. They have gone completely over the top. In fact, I think, when people go down for their vaccination, they stand in the queue as they wait to go in. Have a good look at where your taxpayers' money has gone, because that is absolutely bloody ridiculous, in my opinion. I've never seen anything so over the top. And that is why you've ended up with vaccines sat in a fridge as opposed to going in people's arms. It's shocking, absolutely shocking. And somebody should be able to account for it.
Well, thank you, Derek, and welcome to you this morning, live from Lancashire, a view from afar. Now, I'll just top and tail that vaccine story. So, imagine you're living in Ramsey and you're over 80, you fit the criteria for receiving the vaccine. I think that's fair enough. Somehow, you've got to get down to the airport. And then, fortunately, the last 2 days we've been blessed with great weather, but have you seen the photograph, the queues right down that pavement, which isn't a pleasant place to be? So I just hope we can perhaps get around that issue, that problem. Maybe a secondary hub in Ramsey, maybe a church hall. Is it a cottage hospital? Is it a school building? Is it anything? But I don't know. It's not flowing too well at the moment, is it, Michael?
Well, look, if you are in Ramsey and you do need transport, drop us a line. Like, I'm happy to go for a drive and give you a lift. It can't be that hard, right? Especially given from Monday that a lot of the social distancing restrictions will be lifted. So if anyone out there is listening and they need a lift, I assume I can drive people to the vaccination thing. But it shows you that the government's been a bit disorganised. They've been caught on the back foot here, because all through summer that they were saying that the vaccine wouldn't be here until late 2021. So I think that they thought they had another year to prepare, and now we've been caught a bit flat-footed here, which is why the vaccines before Christmas, remember, they were delayed first of all due to shipping, then they were delayed because of some sort of trivial paperwork issue, then they were delayed because the government wanted to do them over whole weeks. And then it turns out we didn't even need whole weeks to do the things. I think that this has been very disorganised, and really it shows this is not being run by experts. These are political operators who are now trying to cover themselves. In fact, just on Wednesday, the political operators, the so-called experts from the Public Health Isle of Man, they were asked how many vaccine doses were here in the Isle of Man, and they gave answers, and I transcribed it and I listened, and I came away thinking that there was somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 doses on the Isle of Man. But then, we discover that in reality there was 11,000 doses. So these people are just unprepared for what was coming, and that's unprepared everything from people arriving early to get their vaccines delivered, through to people not having good transport. And I think that this is fundamentally these people are not experts. They are political operators who are just trying to cover themselves, and it's a shame, because none of them take any accountability. None of them have been held accountable for any of the errors that they've made at any stage throughout any of this pandemic, and so it's, I guess, what you expect.
Well, thank you, Michael. The issue deserves scrutiny. It deserves someone like yourself who's got the skills to look at data, no matter how simple it is, to post
and by the skills, you mean I graduated grade 9 mathematics. By the way, these are not complicated things.
But what I'm saying is that you've thrown it out into the public domain on the Isle of Man. Okay, so that's one thing. You've appeared up with Paul Moulton on his video channel, and you're here now, and you're just able to explain things in an easy manner so that people can just digest it and form their own opinions. Now,
yeah, well, I guess, Jed, one of the things that's right there is I just talk straight, right? And so when the so-called public health experts were asked the question how many vaccine doses were here on the Isle of Man, you can look through the answer, and as I am here with you right now, we can look at the transcript, and they give various answers, they give various numbers. And during their answer, literally the highest number that they gave at any stage during their answer of how many vaccine doses are on the Isle of Man, the highest number that they actually said out loud was 2,800.
Ooh.
And what they were doing is they were breaking it down into different groups, right? And so they said we have 2,400 vaccinations on Ireland for the first dose and 2,800 on the second dose. But what I didn't realise, and what anyone listening to that probably was tricked by, is that they were only referring there to one certain set of vaccines. And then there was another whole set of vaccines where they never identified the total number. And so when you give out numbers of 2,400 or 2,800, and you discover that the true number is 11,000, I think people would have a right to be, surprised. And so all I'm doing here is sharing the government's numbers using straight talk.
I've just got one for Derek here, but if you are watching and there are people tuning in, if you've got any comments, put them in the box. Ask Michael a question. Is Michael a data expert on the Isle of Man? Yes, I think so. That is my opinion. But Derek, I am a fussy shopper, okay? And this vaccine rollout is causing me chaos. It's causing me havoc because what I want to do, I don't want to buy now. I don't want to get it now. I want to wait until I've got the vaccine that covers all. There's so many variations out there. I'm not sure about the Russian Sputnik version that's been sent off to Angola or something, but I don't know. Are we better just hanging on? Because this South African variant, the Brazilian variant, I'm flummoxed really what to do.
Crikey, there's a lottery in play with a lot of it, isn't there? We don't know what is ahead of us. So there are a lot of unknowns as it stands at the moment. But you've got to go with your best shot. One of the things we used to talk about in Firearms Command was that sometimes you had to make decisions with very limited information, which were real critical sort of life and death decisions at times. You couldn't wait for all the data to come in to decide whether you were going to send armed cops out to the door. You had to make some really sort of solid judgment calls. There are models that help you do that. They're tried and tested and they work. But because we don't actually get shown the decision-making processes that the Isle of Man government use, we don't know how effective those decisions actually are. What it appears at the moment is a bit like a game of schoolboy football where everyone's running around after the ball and then somebody might go off and do their own thing. And it does look a little bit of a cluster, to be honest with you. Now, in the UK, I'm not saying it's any better at all. If anything, it's actually a little bit more shambolic, and there's more places to hide in the UK as well. There was somebody on this morning ranting to me about. Don't know who that is. They can go away for now. They were ranting about the fact that their green bins now won't be collected till March because of COVID, and this because of COVID seems to be an excuse. We know what needs doing. We know what the mission is. We know the tactical parameters that we have to operate in. Let's just get it done, to use Boris's phrase. Let's get vaccinations done or whatever. So I am a bit of a loss with it. We know where we're up to. We know what we've got. We've got to go with our best guess. But I think things like that Michael's highlighted there, that there's all these vaccines sat in a fridge with no good reason, is absolutely scandalous. I'm at a loss. I really am.
Okay, we'll just put that to one side. So, Michael, you featured in social media heavily on that, but my eye was casting over a place I don't go to very often, and that is the dark world of Manx forums. And the post of Lieutenant Governor came up on the screen, and I saw that Mr. Derek Flint was touted for the position. Is it time for Derek to come back and jump on the gravy train?
Hey, for £108,000 a year tax-free, count me in. A lot of people don't know. I actually I applied. I was first loser for the job of the Lieutenant Governor's private secretary. The incumbent that got it is a level above me, retired wing commander. She is really good.
She is, isn't she? So, yeah.
If I'd known she was a candidate, I probably wouldn't have applied in the first place. But I got a very nice letter off His Excellency commiserating me on my defeat. And I think it would have been a very interesting job, especially for somebody like me, because one of the things I don't think Government House does enough of is actually publicise its worth. All it does is get slagged off all the time, for this grace and favour house that there is and a bit of glad handing. Well, there's actually a lot more that goes on behind the scenes, and I had a sort of vision that perhaps more could have been done with a social media account to let people know what HE was doing and make it's a little bit more accessible. Whether or not that would have been acceptable remains to be seen. But of course, the private secretary isn't actually employed by His Excellency. They're actually a member of the Cabinet Office. They're under the head of Crown and External Relations, Peter Boxer, as it is now. So it's the whole thing's a bit of an odd setup. I mean, the thing that's always puzzled me is it's the Crown's representative, but the Manx taxpayer pay for the privilege of having them. It's something which I think it's an argument to which he's going to roll on and on. But hey, crikey, 108 grand, I'll be back like that. So just
Michael,
put the nomination forward.
Well, Michael, you've grown up under colonialism, haven't you? And you've come to the Isle of Man, and you've seen there's quite a bit of pomp attached to this role, and we've got someone who is sitting alongside government, overseeing government, and is supposed to kind of just step in now and again and go, hang on a minute, this practice that is going on, we need to put a stop to it. And I've never actually seen that role enhanced. I mean, Michael, what's your view? Republic?
So I sort of like the idea of being a Manx person being appointed to the role, and so you made a reference to my colonial past.
You might this might be a homecoming for you, Michael. If you trash you might have been, your family might have been cast to the colonies for some penal offence back in the 1700s. So you might actually be Manx, mate. You just need to do some digging.
No. So I can tell you my ethnic background. My ethnic background is that they were Germans and Poles who went to Australia after World War II, and so the whole criminal past has no relationship to me. And I've sort of always rolled my eyes at such things. But here in the Isle, I've always thought it'd be good if the Lieutenant Governor was someone who had some sort of connection to the Isle of Man. And that's why our co-host here, Derek Flint, would be a wonderful candidate. But more substantially, from a constitutional point of view, it should just be a figurehead, and that this is a role to ensure that, if there is some sort of parliamentary or democratic collapse or dispute or crisis, that there is an independent arbiter to step in. That is the reserved powers of the Queen in the UK. That is the reserved powers of the Governor General and the various governors in Australia. In fact, in Australia, those powers were exercised once back in 1975 when a government tried to govern without being able to pass a budget, and the Governor General of Australia at the time, Sir William Kerr, sacked the government and held fresh elections. And so there is theoretically a role for the Lieutenant Governor of the Isle of Man to step in, but realistically, let's hope he doesn't, and let's hope that responsible democratic government continues as a pace. By the way, just for those people who are interested in this sort of stuff, that is one of the key differences between the Westminster-derived systems that we have here in the Commonwealth and the American system. If the American system can't pass a budget, as has happened a few times in recent decade or so, they have a government shutdown. Whereas here in the Isle of Man in the UK, we can't have that. Instead, what would happen is the Queen or the Lieutenant Governor would sack the government and order new elections.
Well, my view is we've got a system that's been stagnant for as long as I've known, probably beyond that, decades and decades. We've got a system that has a male in the number one slot. I think we have got to modernise. It must be slicker. It must be more democratically appointed, something more in tune with the Isle of Man, someone to do with a person with perhaps a greater affinity and knowledge. Having a rear admiral dropped in from afar, it doesn't really sit well with me. But that's my view. I think if we could just move on to the gravy train section, and we had the Manx National Heritage top job has come up. I've just put it up on the screen from Job Train. 88 to 97 grand, Derek. What's your view on that? It's your first day in charge of Manx National Heritage. What are you going to do?
Bloody hell. I honestly don't know. I mean, try and justify my salary, I think. I mean, I liked Ed. He wasn't everybody's cup of tea, but I did like the guy, and he was an interesting bloke to spend time with. But is it really an 85 grand a year post? That's above superintendent. That's above chief superintendent money. And you look at the responsibility that a chief super would carry. I don't know. It sits uncomfortably with me. And I think one of the things that really starts to need to come into focus now is, Alf was on saying it's going to cost the Manx economy 200 million quid to sort all this stuff out post-COVID and everything, get the economy going again. We still seem to be spending money like it's going out of fashion. There seems to be no rationalisation of salaries, of posts. And, I look at jobs over here in the UK and what the wages that similar roles in the Isle of Man are attracting. And it's a good 20%, 30% above in a lot of cases. And all right, you've got to attract people there and so on, and the cost of living, I don't subscribe to that, to be honest with you. I think the cost of living is actually higher, bar food and energy, in the UK. Where is this rationalisation from government coming in terms of saying, hey, hang on a minute, do we really need this post at the moment? And if we do we need it to be as highly paid as it is? Our heritage is important. The Manx heritage is a jewel in the crown, and some of it is, incomparable to anything else in the world. But really, I'm not sure that salaries in terms of, the top end of the National Trust will be attracting as much as that post. Maybe okay. Time for a rethink.
Okay, Michael, I'm going to put you on the spot you've been here, 10 years, haven't you? Something like that, yeah. Tell me, when you've arrived on the Isle of Man and do your stuff at the weekends, how much interest is Manx National Heritage to you? How often is it become part of your itinerary of things to do?
Sure. So yeah, I'm a big fan. I love the Manx National Heritage. And I'm not sure if the steam trains and all that sort of business counts as part of it, but I'm a big fan of heading down to Castletown, the Castle Russian. I love that stuff down at the Sound, and I love that. Repeatedly, I've tried to go across to Peel Castle and walked around it, but for some bad luck or something, I always seem to go on days when it's closed or whatnot. And so I'm not afraid, not I don't know what the right word is, but I have a slightly different view to Derek on the issue of paying the the chief executive or whatever it's called of the Manx National Heritage, and that is, I think it is we should pay people but demand results. And so I would love to see people who are doing this stuff, which is valuable to our culture, to our heritage, to our traditions, but to have their rewards or remuneration linked to their results. So, for example, if this person is able to do a wonderful thing for Manx National Heritage and get people flocking to the sites and celebrating the cultural heritage of the Isle of Man, then let us pay them big bucks. On the other hand, if they're a miserable failure, then let us pay them very little. And so I'm a big fan of the idea of performance pay and connecting it to outcomes. And so when I see a taxpayer-funded job, which is going to be very secure and very, very comfortable, paying big money, as you say, then I want to see outcomes. And so Derek touched on a point there of, in the police force, as a chief superintendent, you apparently have, certain responsibilities and connections to that. And so I would like to see a connection between taxpayer paying money and taxpayer getting value. And I think then that would allow good people to be rewarded, but also allow accountability for taxpayer money.
Okay, and I'm absolutely 100% behind you. I think it deserves a medieval-style flogging, this one. Actually, the structure, from what I know of it, isn't quite straightforward. And people in government don't have direct control over what happens around Manx National Heritage sites. Okay, we've got the director with a trust who kind of shape the pathway ahead. So we'll just keep an eye on that one, but you're absolutely bang on. Get someone in there who's creative, imaginative, and has to deliver some results, because, I've been in the castle hundreds of times, over 10 years. So many, not hundreds, maybe that's an exaggeration, but many, many times. And I think some of our heritage sites just need a bit of a rebrand, a change in identity. Let's establish that Viking heritage wherever it is somewhere, because they're exciting. That appeals to kids and families and so forth. But there we go. Anyway, we're just going to talk now about post boxes. And I'll pull the question up on the screen. And this is live. This is in Tynwald, or the House of Keys, next week. And it's from the Castletown member, Mr. Morehouse. On how many occasions in 2020 local authorities, businesses and individuals were contacted about people potentially confusing their private post boxes for genuine Isle of Man post ones. What's the story, Derek?
What the hell's that all about? And where on earth does that question have a place within national politics? Jason, if you're watching this, you really need to have a word at yourself. There's an election in September. If you're thinking about standing again, you need to ask some sensible questions rather than ones that are taking up parliamentary time with nonsense like this. If you haven't noticed, there's a bit of a crisis on at the moment, and that is what we need to resolve. Not whether somebody's putting a bloody post in his post box by mistake, which will doubtless get sorted out by whose ever problem it is. I mean, Jesus, I've never seen anything like it.
Michael, what's your interpretation of this?
So I gather that back in the 1960s, that this was a problem in that this is how people would run literal man-in-the-middle attacks. They'd run phishing attacks. So in the way that today you get fake email, maybe 60 years ago, well before I was born, people may have tried to intercept postal mail, in like this. But I think Derek is right, and this is something that has been on the agenda of the House of Keys for last week at least, and now it's being last month rather, and now it's being bumped along, and these are just not the right priorities in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that there might be some sort of election campaigning issue here in favour of him asking this question, because I assume that someone somewhere, one of his constituents has raised the issue with him, and he's therefore pushing it along. But I think Derek is right. This is a waste of our parliamentary resources. There are far more important things that backbenchers could be doing to scrutinise the government, such as asking why 2/3 of the vaccines that have been delivered to the Isle of Man are sitting in freezers.
Time to deliver something useful. But I'll ask you guys, it's just a simple question, and I'll phrase it in two camps. How many letters are you sending a month? And how many times have you used a public phone box? Derek, quick one.
Couple, 2, 3 letters. Quite a few letters at the moment. I've stuff to post, DVLA and stuff like that, and I've got stuff that needs to go back to the Isle of Man bank here, which arrived after we shut their account. And stuff like that. Fan
mail, all that. But a telephone box, they're obsolete, aren't they?
Generally, the only time I send a letter, and it's when I actually want to make an impact, because it happens so rarely now that if you want to make an impact with somebody, a nice envelope, a nice piece of parchment paper, nicely typed out with a fountain pen signature, really sends a message. And I don't think you should ever discount the value of that. But post is dear. It was 80 odd pence to send a letter over here now. So it is a dear thing. Email sorts out most stuff. WhatsApp and all the other messaging services sorts out so much that used to go in the letterbox. But post boxes, crikey, there's one in the next village. Telephone boxes. In fact, I drove past the place the other day. I said to the missus, I said, there used to be a telephone box there. They've all gone. They just don't exist anymore.
Exactly. Now, Michael, you'll be, crikey, probably emptying a sack full at your house 2 weeks on Monday, on the 14th of February. But generally, day-to-day business, how often are you sending a mail? Oh, hello, Michael. Where are you gone? Well, we'll wait for Michael to just come back. He's frozen in time.
Come on. Whilst we're on, what's that about? What was that thing about things parked on pavements that you came up with? The don't park on pavements, and then you say a picture of a van parked on a pavement. Please, fans.
I don't normally cause a shitstorm on Twitter, but I'm afraid that one did, and it kind of spread far and wide. But I'll tell you what my rationale was, okay? Like a lot of us, I'm frustrated about the lack of action on the road safety strategy. Okay, that was introduced nearly 2 years ago, and we've had zero output. We've got hardly anything regarding measures to make our driving safer and so forth. And I see this this press release, don't park on pavements, and I'm thinking, come on. you've got much more pressing matters to deal with. We've had an accident a day on the mountain. We've had car crashes galore. We've had the tragic death of another cyclist on our island. So I thought, well, it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was in Port Erin and I saw an absolute aberration of police parking. There was no need for it, and I actually was in the area and I just thought, I'll just keep an eye on what's happening here. It was just pure laziness. There wasn't any, emergency or any domestic. It's on one of the widest roads in Port Erin, and there just seemed to be no reason for it. And I'm sorry, I mean, I blanked out the number plate. I don't want an officer to get crushed by some overzealous senior staff, but it's just to send the message out: get your priorities right, Isle of Man Constabulary. Just protect people, make the roads safer.
It is.
Well, you did awake the chief constable from his social media slumber.
Yes.
And he's waded back in, and now he's retired again. And it sort of made me think of Elton John, who famously retired in 1977, saying, "This is my last ever show." And 45 years later, he is still performing. And so,
I know. I can't. You know Gary well, don't you, Derek? What's happening behind the scenes there? Is there something else going on?
Well, I know him well in terms of however well you actually get to know him. He plays his cards very close to his chest. He will have his reasons. I think it sends the wrong message. I think the Isle of Man Constabulary's social media, hats off to Gavin Callow, who took my job over on the press and PR side of things. I think generally it is really, really good at the moment. The messaging is strong. The support and imagery is strong, apart from the police van on the pavement side of things. There will be the odd own goal every now and then. But for Gary not to actually be part of that is disappointing, but also I think it actually undermines what everybody else is doing. It just seems like he's taken his ball and gone off home to Castletown for some bizarre reason. The strong chief constables are in there in the fray. If people want to see how it should be done, look at Nick Adley from Northamptonshire Police. Unrelenting, apologises when he needs to, massively supportive of his staff, takes on the idiots and the trolls head on in a surgical way. I think he's ex-Navy, so that ability to do surgical banter helps an awful lot. But it's part of the job. And, there are sometimes, I've had stuff on social media when I felt absolutely crushed by it. I thought, crikey, why have you said that? You don't know me. You don't know what I've been doing behind the scenes and this, that and the other. But you pick yourself up from it because it's important, and it's important to be part of that battle. And the great thing about social media is, and I said when I brought all this in the constabulary many, many years ago, you can have conversations with 80,000 people on social media. The old way of doing it in a church hall, where you might get 25 people, are long gone. And that depth of debate, and also there's, even when people are having a dig at you, there's nuanced stuff in there which you actually need to look at, and you need to pick out the threads from it and look at what people are telling you at a subliminal level.
Absolutely.
So I hope Gary gets back into it. I really do, because I think it sends the wrong message.
Well,
it undermines it. It makes people think there's something wrong here. So what is it, Gary? Come on, let's get back in. You'll get the support off me when you deserve it, and you'll get a bit of a sideways swipe when you don't. But ultimately, there's a job to be done, and people expect you to do it.
Well, we know there's a lot of pressure at the moment, staffing-wise. I mean, it's resignations galore. I'm hearing the retention of new recruits is absolutely desperate. And then we had a little dig at Jason Morehouse, the member for Castletown, a couple of minutes ago. But we'll just push the pendulum the other way. And I've just put a graphic on the screen, and it's about a question that has been answered in the written format, and it's to do with adult cautions on the police system. So there's been something going on behind the scenes, and I'd recommend anyone to check into Hansard, but it seems that there's been cautions incorrectly applied over the years, which do have consequences. Derek, I'll just come back to you because you got the knowledge of this.
Look, a caution, for a caution to be administered, the person's got to admit the offence, they've got to be willing to accept the caution, and there must be sufficient evidence to stand a reasonable prospect of conviction at court. When I arrived in the Isle of Man in 1988, I mean, if we were cautioning somebody for something in the UK, it was actually had a bit of gravitas behind it. You will be cautioned for driving without due care and attention. Do you admit this? Yes, I do. And the sergeant would sit down with you and, and administer it properly. These were being lashed out in the post after virtually every collision on the island, where we intend to caution you for due care. Do you accept this? And people were signing them back without any thought of the consequences that could affect their insurance, that it's going to be a disclosable offence for certain occupations and so on. And it was plain wrong. I remember challenging it at the time. It never really got sorted out. But I think now, especially now, there's a very savvy incumbent head of prosecutions at the AGs. And I think these things are slowly getting sorted out because they've just gone on for too long. They've just been, if you like, Manx malpractice for a long time. But certainly, I would say to anybody that's ever faced with will you accept a caution, take some advice on it. So it's very, very important to understand that it's not just a disposal so that the Isle of Man constabulary can get a crime. It's got to be, is there sufficient evidence for a reasonable prospect of a conviction at court? That is the key thing. And very, very often you'll find that if you say, no, are we going to go to court on this? Have you got sufficient evidence to prosecute me in court? They'll back down.
Well, Michael, it sounds to me like as though it's, well, if you sign this, we won't be prosecuting you. We won't be taking you to court. We won't be, having your name featured in the newspaper. Trust issue? Oh, Michael's frozen again. I'll just pull something up online.
I can hear you fine.
There you go.
He's here.
Come in.
I'm here. Yeah, so what I was saying is I had a good friend of mine, another former police officer who I used to work alongside, who moved to the Isle of Man some years ago. And he had a road traffic collision whereby basically he hit and I forget the exact details, but basically hit a fence of a house. Goes inside, tells them, hey, look, I've hit your house. They have a cup of tea while they wait for the repair guy to come and have a bit of a chat. And anyway, that was all sorted, and obviously he paid for the to fix up the fence or whatever it was. Anyway, sometime later he gets contacted by the police and he's accused of a hit and run accident for failing to notify the owners of the property. And he said, what are you talking about? I hit the fence, obviously. Then I went inside. I used their phone to call. We had a cup of tea. And the police said, well, no, sir. They were not the owners. They were only the renters of the property. You did not inform the owners of the property of the incident. And there are some, will you accept the caution? And he said, oh, you've got to be kidding. And, he did because he took it as a disposal notice. And in that sense, I think it's a bit weird in some of these judgments. But then again, I am not there, so I can only tell the story of my ex-police officer mate who I used to sit next to at work. But
I had one. It was in snow. I was coming down the mountain from Hailwood's Rise towards the bungalow, and a car came round the corner. She was doing no more than 15 miles an hour. It stepped out, it caught the bank, and it ended up on its roof. And it was like, goodness gracious. So there we were, stood out in the middle of it. Phoned it in, directed traffic, shut the mountain and all the usual stuff. And she was fine. But the bobby that turned up said, afterwards, I'm intending to put her in for a caution for due care. I said, you can't. It happened right in front of me. It was one of those things. She wasn't doing anything wrong. It's literally just gone wrong in a split second. We can't be cautioning people for that. There isn't sufficient evidence to stand a reasonable prospect of a conviction at court, and that was within the last 5 years. So it's just it's a mindset and a mentality that culturally exists within the force, and these are the things that take an awful long time to change. But that gives you some idea of what it can be like.
Well, that's a good valued opinion from both of you. We'll be finishing off soon, but I just pulled something off the Hansard. Again, it's a written answer. I don't know whether you actually saw this, but it relates to external legal advice where it couldn't be obtained from the Attorney Generals, and there are some big numbers here. So it's broken down into different departments, and I don't know whether you've seen it, boys, but Cabinet Office, 361 grand. Department of Home Affairs, £424,000. I'd imagine that's for external legal counsel in cases and what have you. And what have we got else? Hospital, DHSC, that's over £1 million. It's over £1 million.
Yeah, so it's quite possible that some of this will be advice for legal advice for outside the Isle of Man. So, for example, recently, there was this guy up in Scotland who wanted to run, his brand TT bikes or something like that, and the Isle of Man government said, no, you can't call your business TT bikes because you have no association with TT, right? And so in that sense, some of these sort of situations outside the Isle of Man, especially into the UK and even further afield, might require some legal advice. Especially when we're hiring people, the government is and the ship registry, now has an office over in China, and so there's a lot of extraterritorial activities of the Isle of Man government, and it's quite possible that this is part of that. But it requires, I think, some further investigation.
Yeah, I mean, Derek, it's not being overcritical because we don't know what the backstory is, but there's always, well, where is this expenditure coming from? But, Michael's right, we are working in other jurisdictions with other parties, and it's got to be right, but how do we get to that legal question, that legal problem in the first place, and how necessary is it for the island's, progression and development?
I think one of the interesting things here, it'd be interesting to get an FOI and say, on a redacted basis, what was the breakdown of this? The Home Affairs advice given on X, advice given on Y, or whatever. And is it advice? It says it's legal advice. It isn't legal process. It's legal advice, and that these are big figures. You would think that some of it might be covered by insurance. I mean, the DHSC side of things, there, 1.1 million. Now, is this for legal advice on negligence claims? Well, surely that must be underwritten by the government insurers. Or is it actually coming out of Treasury coffers? There's a lot more questions to be asked with regard to that. And also, it's why is the stuff there that you can't actually go to your in-house legal advisors for the Attorney Generals? There's a big piece of work there. Is anybody bothered enough? I don't know. But these are the sort of questions where there's probably money to be saved. And at a time of financial crisis as exists at the moment worldwide, not just on the island, every pound saved has got to be a good thing.
Yeah, I think Derek is right there in that it certainly raises some questions, but there are plausible answers. And that's why 2 minutes ago, or 3 minutes ago, we were talking and joking about the member for Castletown asking about confusing post boxes. And this is the sort of questions that they should be scrutinising and raising and investigating, because we're all right here and there are plausible answers, but there are also very serious questions that need to be asked. And so that's why, we joke around, this talk about the confusing post boxes issue or the questions. But there is also a more fundamental thing, is that they're shirking the real responsibility of their job, which is to scrutinise and investigate. And there are plausible answers, but there are very serious questions.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Excellent. Well, I think it's just time to finish it off. We're coming up to 45 minutes or so. Thank you so much for viewing and tuning in. If you've got any comments, put them in the box and we can maybe answer some stuff next week. Have a great weekend, Derek. Have a great weekend, Michael. We'll see you again.
See you soon, fellas. Good to catch up.
Thanks for having us.